This is a virtual reading of Conspirators, To Each His Own Agenda by Matt Gupta. Chapter 4. The Villain Wall. Flavor approached the fort gatehouse. It was a simple wall made out of cheap concrete. It was only 3 people high, and wasn't particularly thick. The men on the wall were Kingdom militia, armed in a similar appearance to the Icefield warriors, with the same rectangular shields and short stabbing swords, but these men were lightly armoured in chainmail, with a simple layer of black cloth over it. Their helmets, however, were made of the same style as their heavily armoured brothers used on the battlefield. The militia units were civilian recruits, used only for the defence and rarely for attack. As Favor's company approached, the sleepy men rose to attention. Favor stopped just short of the gate, leaving his company and bodyguards a few paces behind him. "In the name of the Marble City," the militia captain challenged, "identify yourself." "Consul Flavor, Provincial Governor of Dacia, Captain General of the 13 Legions of the Kingdom, Defender of the Woodland Colonies," Favor said. He had many more titles to add to this, but he wanted to leave a simple modesty. The captain nodded in respect. "Welcome home, General," he smiled. "We have long awaited your arrival." "What news of our arrival in the White City?" "The people will wait to welcome you in a fever," the captain said. "They have cried your name in the streets. Games and shows have been in full flow for many days. The men in the Citadel, however, have forbidden you a triumph, and have made it public knowledge that you are to be disciplined upon your arrival." "Indeed," Favor nodded. "I take it we are allowed entry." "Of course, sir." The captain nodded to the gateman, who began working the gate winch. "When will your troops begin to disband into the city?" "They won't." Favor shook his head. "My army shall remain in camp by the wall." "It is law to disband the army before crossing the border into the Villum." The captain seemed just as surprised as Cameron had been. "I cannot allow you past with your army." "The army will not be crossing," Favor reassured him. "They will camp at the wall boundary." "Do I have your word?" the captain demanded. "You have my word and my life." Favor inclined his head slightly and placed his hand on his heart. The captain's posture changed abruptly. He smiled and stepped to one side, despite the fact that he was on top of the wall. "Fortune be with you, sir." He saluted and inclined his head. Cameron chuckled and patted the top of the arched door respectfully as he passed under it. Gilorn lingered by the threshold. "The door won't bite," Cameron reassured him, turning to wait for him, "but you may want to hurry before you get hung as a trespasser." It was a big step for Gilorn. His entire family had grown in the shadow of the Bridge City, and it was always said that he would never see the inside of that city, let alone the inside of Villain Wall. At first, Cameron was patient with him, but Favor's company was starting to put a lot of distance between them. He finally ordered Gilorn sharply to cross. Gilorn jumped at his sharpness and quickly dashed over to him. Cameron said nothing and encouraged his horse into a quick trot. They eventually caught up with Flavor, who had slowed down, either for their benefit or to listen to the cheers and praises of the people around them. Gilorn had never seen anything like it. For miles upon miles was fertile and beautiful land. All around him were countless allotments. Cattle roamed up and down, pulling ploughs and planting seed. Many were transporting rocks away from the main outstretch. The earth next to them was deeply dark brown and healthy. Anything could grow here, and the yield would be 3 times what he would expect to grow at home. The farmers who he passed gave him sceptical looks. Even though they were covered in soil and working hard labour, it was clear that these were men of quality, and far beyond that of Gilorn's social rank. He quickened his pace to stay close to Cameron, but before long, Cameron had come to a complete stop. "Well done on your victory, my lord," the man was calling to Favour. "I pray to the ancestors that your good fortune will continue." "Is my son with your army, sir?" another man shouted. "When will our boys come home? Will those serpents return? Why didn't you destroy them?" "Oh," Cameron sighed wearily. This was his cue. He dismounted and handed the reins vaguely to Gilorn, who was closest. He marched purposely over to the crowd, nodding to the other Citadel guards as he did so. The guards closed rank, spreading out into a crescent moon formation, with Flavor, Turgan, and their aides safely in the arms of the moon, but still able to see where they were going, and the crowd to see them. The crowds were now separated from Flavor on 3 sides. Gilorn was stuck at the back of the formation, but on the wrong side of it. The guardsman, unable to distinguish him from the rest of the crowd, buffered him away from the formation and left him standing with Cameron's horse. He'd been dreading something like this happening as soon as he had learned that they were heading into the city. If the company entered the city without him, he wouldn't be able to gain entry himself, and he would be caught and tried as an enemy of state for trespassing in the capital, a sacrilegious crime as well as a civil one. He looked around helplessly, his fear gripping him too tightly to call out after the company over the cheers and shouts. He turned to look at the horse, a brown war horse with white patches around his eyes and side. He considered asking him for advice, but then remembered that it was a horse. Gilorn took his chance and mounted the beast. He'd handled horses as a farm utility, but he'd never ridden one. The horse knew this somehow and grunted, but it was not unkind. Gilorn was sitting improperly in the saddle and had jerked forward, jostling him into the proper position. With Gilorn out of its line of sight, it then saw that its subjects were in formation without it. It let out another huff and casually jogged to where it was supposed to be standing in the crescent formation. The sister guardsman Gilorn had taken his position next to looked him up and down. It was clear he was about to ask what he was doing there, not having been introduced to Gilorn, but the horse buffeted Camiron's back, causing him to turn and give an approving nod. The guardsman took this as enough cause not to question Gilorn's presence and moved on with the company. They continued on like this until the company stopped to wait for a cart to be moved out of their way. Gilorn dismounted, for want of a better term, landing flat on his back. Camiron laughed mercilessly as he leapt onto his horse effortlessly and presented Gilorn the shaft of his spear. He pulled Gilorn to his feet quickly and ushered him into the crescent, so that he was walking next to Flavor's scribe. The nephew, the boy dressed in the robes of the Fountain Court, looked down at him with disdain, clearly hoping that Gilorn had become lost. Flavor and Turgon, on the other hand, seemed not to have noticed his absence. The city loomed over them like a mountain it was built next to. Gilorn looked up at the top spar, but he nearly fell backwards in order to keep it in his line of sight. He lost his footing and walked straight into Flavor's horse. "One would think you were drunk," Flavor said disapprovingly. "That would be one way of saying it," Gilorn agreed weakly. "Well, behave yourself," Turgon snapped. "We're approaching the main gate." Gilorn hardly needed to be informed of this. The gate was massive, large enough to allow 2 trebuchets, one on top of the other, to fit through it. The soldiers at the top of the gatehouse were cheering them. The captains of the gate watch called down to the men on ground level. The gate was designed to be impenetrable from the outside, but easy to open from the inside. The locks were set into place with cogs and gears that were turned by winches by the gate. Once the locks were set to the open position, it would only take 6 men to pull the gate open. The door opened, and they passed over the threshold. The streets were filled with people, but it wasn't a mass mob moving through the city. These people were waiting for them. The main street was cleared to allow them to pass through, but the soldiers holding the crowds in place were barely able to maintain their positions. They cheered and called Flavor's name and rank as they passed, showering them in flower petals. The journey through the streets was a long and arduous one. The city spanned many miles. Gilorn was beyond tired by the second gate, but his excitement at all the sights around him helped him move. The smiths were pounding steel and iron in ways he'd never seen in his life. Just seeing the swords hanging from the shelves was mesmerizing for him. Camiron was staying close to him, using his horse to block him from veering too far, but when Gilorn spotted the lumber worker, who was making bows, Camiron couldn't stop him. "Where in Hades have you been all my life?" he said to the bowmaker. "Who the hell are you?" the man grunted. But he obviously knew where Gilorn had come from. "Stay with the group, Ranger," Camiron said, manoeuvring his horse between Gilorn and the bowmaster. "My lord," the bowmaster bowed. "You leave the group again," Camiron growled, all of the friendliness he'd shown at the gate and the bridge gone, "and we will leave you." "Camiron," Turgon called. "Keep up or be dismissed." "Move," Camiron growled, nudging his horse into Gilorn and almost knocking him over. Gilorn knew he was to blame, so he made no apology or defence, and simply fell into line. After what seemed an age, they reached the stairs to the pyramid. They dismounted and made the climb to the top of the city. It was windy, and their cloaks nearly carried them off their feet. Gilorn saw the view first. The land stretched before him as small as a piece of paper. The villum, the wall, the bridge city, the woodland of Dacia, even the far reaches of the forgotten lands to the east. For a moment, his excitement turned to dread, as a shiver ran down his spine. He couldn't keep his gaze and he turned. A feeling comparable to looking down a bottomless pit seemed to be emanating from the huge span of land. He took a step back in astonishment. He was looking at the citadel of the Marble City. A pure white building 3 stories high. Unlike the streets and walls of the city, which were chipped and worn from age, this building was completely untouched by the world. A flight of marble stairs lay before them, to a set of richly brown doors. The patio before the doors was lined with perfectly rounded archways, each carved with brilliant artistry of the kingdom's past glories and magnificence. It was a compound of buildings, rather than a simple hall of kings like one would expect. Gilorn guessed that an army could fit inside the citadel easily, and ironically, he was right. In the courtyard of the citadel were several well-kept gardens of flowers and the white fountain. It was marble, but filthy. Mould and rot were setting into the carvings, and the artistry had been chipped and worn. The water running out was turning brown in the pool, but 10 men in heavy armour, with long spears and kite shields, were standing around it. The shields were made of a golden material, with a silvery blue design in the middle. These were the wardens of the Fountain Legion, the most elite and respected commanders of the first legion to be created in history, the Ancient King's Legion. The men of the Fountain Legion were soldiers of the highest rank, the most expensive and professional of all soldiers. It was the same group that Flavor's nephew had been inducted into. Their training would take decades for them to be deployed in force or to be assigned to a member of a royal family. Only the landowning families of the kingdom could offer someone to the Fountain Legion, as the weaponry, armour, and training had to be provided by the families. Although they had mainly been used as the king's personal bodyguards, they had, in past, often been deployed as a hoplite force, utilising their powerful phalanx formations as shock tactics. The wardens were standing stock still at attention, their blue and white cloaks blowing in the wind, and their spears standing parallel and erect next to them. Their diamond-shaped shields were on floor level, and partially hidden under their cloaks. They wore sinister helmets, heavy set steel with white plumes to symbolise their station. They were designed so that the guardsmen could only see and hear forwards. Although this seemed to Gilorn to be a tactical flaw, it worked out well for the guardsmen, as their armour, skill, and spear length made them all but invincible in a head-on conflict. Their faces were covered in black fabric, so that the only thing that could be seen through their helmets were their eyes. Gilorn noticed this as he passed by them, noticing their eyes following them as they walked by. "Is that," he whispered to Camiran, "the Silver Fountain of Kings?" "Yes," Camiran smiled. He reached out and touched the stone. As if something spiritual had come off the fountain onto his fingertips, he raised his helmet and pressed the fingers to his forehead. "The fountain from which the blood of Conspirators flows." He spoke in the tongue of the ancient kingdom, San Grial. Gilorn was silent for a moment, and then he mimicked Camiran. But Camiran grabbed his wrist painfully and pushed it away. "The only way you get to touch that stone is if you become a member of the guard." "Oh," Gilorn said, looking to one of the wardens. He turned his head and was looking at Gilorn sternly. "Sorry," he said, more to the wardens than Camiran. They turned back to the company. "This is the Fountain of Legend, the one that's embossed on all the soldiers' armour and shields." "Yes," Camiran said. It was true. The white fountain was the ultimate symbol for the kingdom, one they guarded most jealously. "Good, isn't it?" "It's a broken, rotting piece of stone," Gilorn stated. "Hardly a symbol of the gods, isn't it?" "Take care how you speak," Camiran said sternly. "It may not be pretty, but it is the most valuable artifact in the kingdom." He looked at the wardens around them. "I do not jest," he whispered to Gilorn in a hurried voice. "These are highly spiritual men. The Fountain Court is a calling, not a military position. To speak ill of them is a great offence, and more importantly, they will kill you for offending them." "Right." Gilorn hunched over, attempting to hide from the warden's glares. It was clear Camiran had a deep respect for these men, so he didn't question anything further. "This is where I leave you, Captain," Turgan excelled cheerfully. He took Favor's arm and smiled at him. "It's been a pleasure," Turgan nodded. "Be safe, my friend, but don't stay too comfortable. I will have need of you soon." "Hopefully not too soon," Turgan smiled. "I've been away from the women of the White City for too long. I have many legs to open and more pints to drink." He made to leave. "Turgan," Flavor said, slightly strictly. Turgan smiled and turned back. He removed his helmet, a steel piece of armour with a red plume in it. "I stand relieved, sir." He offered the helmet to him. "Yes, you do." Flavor took the helm and nodded. One of Flavor's aides came to take the helmet away. "Go with fortune, my friend." "Only this time," Camiran smoked, "without more bastards." "I only have one bastard," Turgan raised an eyebrow, "wherever the fuck he is." Flavor embraced him, and Turgan departed. He nodded to the citadel guards, who were standing by the door. These were the same warrior caste as Camiran. They had the same silver helmets, which shone white even when it wasn't light, with black and gold cloaks. They weren't nearly as disciplined as the wardens, and they welcomed Camiran with great enthusiasm. Camiran brushed them off, and followed Flavor into the throne room. Gilorn lingered nervously by the threshold as he did at the wall. "Gilorn!" Camiran belled. It echoed around the room. "Hurry the fuck up!" Gilorn rushed over. "Why did the legate leave us?" he asked, "and why did he call the general captain?" Camiran was clearly getting bored with the questions. "Only people of nobility are allowed in this room, or members of the Citadel Guard," he added as an afterthought. "Turgon doesn't apply, unfortunately. You're here as a member of Favor's company and here with a purpose, so do yourself a favour," he added. "Keep up and keep quiet, unless spoken to. Who's going to talk to me, in here of all places? Just hold your tongue." Camiran shook his head in annoyance. "We're in the presence of the rulers of the kingdom now."